At the beginning of the 19th century, the rhythm of life was at odds with the slowness of communications. News, commercial transactions, and personal messages circulated at the speed of horses, trains, and ships, taking days and even weeks to reach their destination. It was in this scenario of contrast that the telegraph emerged, an invention that connected the world and propelled information forward at the speed of electrical signals, forever changing the way we communicate over long distances. It was in the early 1830s when Samuel Morse, a talented painter and inventor from the United States, embarked on a journey that would alter the course of history, revolutionizing global communication. However, his journey towards this achievement is even more remarkable when we consider his life story. Morse was born in 1791 and began his career as an accomplished portrait painter. His skill as a painter was such as to place him among America's finest portraitists. It was a professional career that made him the least likely person to develop the invention. But he had the basic knowledge for that, thanks to his parents who did everything to give him the best possible education. In 1805, at the age of 14, his clergyman father wanted his son to have a stable professional life and placed him at Yale College. There, Morse studied religious philosophy, mathematics, and science, and attended curious lectures on a novelty of the time, electricity, presentations that aroused his interest in the area, but which were not enough to divert him from his main passion, art. After finishing school at age 19, Morse convinced his parents to allow him to pursue an artistic career. With that aim in mind, he set sail for England to hone his skills. A period between 1811 and 1815, when in addition to studying art, he witnessed an avalanche of technological and scientific innovations, ideas that would eventually help him on his future trajectory, even if he didn't know it at that moment. Upon returning to the United States in 1815, Morse continued to paint, founded a studio, and became a renowned portraitist, being recognized as one of America's finest. 2 years later, in 1818, he married and had 3 children over the next few years. But the life that seemed to be going well at first held unexpected challenges. Soon he discovered that despite his paintings attracting public attention, they did not bring in much money, leaving his family in a very difficult financial situation. But the worst was yet to come in 1825. In February of that year, his wife died after giving birth to their 3rd child, and to make matters worse, Morse wasn't at home when the incident happened. He was working on a painting in another city. The news took so long to arrive that she had already been buried when he returned home. If that news had arrived in time, he would still lose his father the next year and his mother 3 years later. This sudden loss of his wife left Morse responsible for caring for the couple's 3 children in a desperate financial situation. A difficult period in which he was entirely dependent on his art and the help of his brothers to support his family. His financial situation was so difficult that a general who had hired him for painting classes said that one day, after he paid the monthly fee and offered dinner, Morse commented the following: "This is my first meal in 24 hours. Strother, don't be an artist. It means beggary. Your life depends upon people who know nothing of your art and care nothing for you. A house dog lives better, and the very sensitiveness that stimulates an artist to work keeps him alive to suffering." These life experiences shaped Morse as a resilient and determined individual, and it was in this context of personal overcoming that he began to explore new ideas and inventions. The idea that would change his life and lead him into a completely different professional field emerged during a sea voyage in 1832. While returning from a professional trip to Europe, Morse met some scientists who were on board the ship. Among the many inspiring conversations they had on that long journey, which took more than 18 days, were the latest studies on electricity. They discussed the discoveries of electromagnetism made by Michael Faraday in England and Joseph Henry in the United States, about how an electrical impulse could be transmitted through a conducting wire over long distances. Conversations that led Morse, right there on the ship, to imagine a device that could use this electricity as a means of communication. That same year, Morse devoted all his free time to working on the invention, a project he grabbed like a lifeboat to save him from his financial disaster. But he still needed to pay the bills and support the kids, so he continued producing portraits and started teaching painting classes at New York University. It was there that he met Alfred Vail, a student and son of a wealthy family who would help him finance the experiments and even develop many parts of the invention in his spare time. To create a communication system that used a language based on electrical impulses, the two began to study the work of physicists such as the American Joseph Henry. They learned, for example, that Henry had performed this experiment in 1832. Using an electromagnet, Henry made sound signals with a bell by sending electrical impulses through a coiled wire over 1 kilometer long. That was it, Morse thought. This was the way. It was 3 years of hard work, building prototypes and managing the added pressure that other inventors in Europe were also working on the same invention. It was September 1837 when he and his assistant Alfred Vail successfully conducted a test using a transmitter and a receiver connected by a 500-meter-long coiled copper wire. A receiver that at that time was inspired by the printing press. Faced with progress, Morse wasted no time. He filed the patent application in October of that year and sought another partnership to finance the next steps. Soon he found another partner who joined the project with the necessary funds, allowing him to completely abandon his artistic career and fully devote himself to the new venture by 1838. But what was the next step? Well, for communication to be possible, it was not enough to send electrical signals randomly through the wire. A code needed to be created in which both parties knew about it, the one that sends and the one that receives the signal. A simple code with dashes and dots, which eventually came to be known as Morse code. In 1840, a patent was granted for improvement in the mode of communicating information by signals by the application of electromagnetism. As you can see, this patent is nothing like the telegraph we know. The project would still change a lot, but the device was ready to be marketed, and this would not be an easy task either. Morse and his partners spent until 1842 trying to attract investors, but no one showed enough interest to invest the thousands of dollars required to build the new communication system, especially for installing the communication lines. It was then that he appealed to the US Congress to help him with his plans, and in 1843, he secured a public investment of $30,000 to establish a telegraph line between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. As soon as the money was released, Morse and Vail rushed to work, stretching the wires between the two cities and installing the instruments. During this time, the telegraph apparatus naturally continued to be improved. For example, something that became apparent in its early uses, even before its inauguration, was that the dashes and dots transmitted with this device were not uniform due to the varying length of time the lever was pressed. Morse and Vail solved this problem by inserting motion limiters. Now, when pressing the lever, the movement occurred automatically at the right and standardized time to produce the message's dashes and dots. They also made drastic changes to the receiver. The previous model, similar to a printing press, was now totally different. It became more compact and designed to perforate the message onto a paper tape swiftly. The paper tape was tensioned and unwound by a weight suspended from a string wrapped around an internal drum. This system activated the gears as soon as the telegraph electromagnet started to work. Finally, the work was completed and everything was ready for the grand inauguration on May 24, 1844. On this day, Samuel Morse sat in front of his telegraph in a room at the Supreme Court and telegraphed the famous phrase that was chosen on the spot, "What hath God wrought?" At the same moment, on the other end of the telegraph, Vail telegraphed the phrase back, proving that he had received the message. The era of telecommunications had begun, and the world would never be the same again. And for Morse, it marked the beginning of an avalanche of lawsuits from various individuals claiming that their ideas had been infringed upon by his patents. The solution to this problem only came in 1854, when the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Morse, stating that he was the first to develop a viable telegraph. Meanwhile, another significant evolution occurred once again in the receiver apparatus. The device was now activated exclusively by a spring that was tensioned by this key. Additionally, the instrument that perforated the code on paper was replaced by an ink marker. Something that also became evident with usage was that operators could decipher the code based on the sound produced by the electromagnet in operation. Therefore, a suitable sounder was designed, and the operators began to understand the messages by ear. Soon, the Morse system proved to be highly profitable and successful, becoming widely used in all parts of the world. In the United States, cities were quickly connected by wires, and by around 1860, all major locations in the country could communicate with each other via telegraph. And after an unsuccessful attempt in 1858, the old and new continents were finally united by a telegraph cable in 1866, stretching across the waters of the Atlantic, from a point on the Irish coast to Canada, allowing 8 words to be transmitted per minute. And before you laugh at this capacity, it's worth mentioning that a letter between the United States and Europe in 1870 took an average of 10 days to be sent. Later, other versions and updates of the telegraph apparatus continued to emerge, such as the wireless telegraph, which operated using radio waves and was present on the famous Titanic, in addition to being widely used in the World Wars. Samuel Morse lived long enough to witness his telegraph bring about many of these transformations. He passed away on April 2, 1872, at the age of 81, as a wealthy man dedicated to philanthropy. And let's not forget his impressive beard, which apparently aimed to project an image of a wise old man. Well, I think we can close this story now, right? Don't forget to like and share. Oh, and don't forget to watch these other videos that I'm showing here. They're very good, I recommend.